Now I'm really
Yeah.
nervous that you're recording this. No, I'm just kidding.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this program on tech startups. My name is Eleanor Chatterton. I'm a librarian with the St. Louis Public Library, and I'm happy to be putting this on with Ed Lehue of the Missouri Small Business Development Center, where he is an innovation and technology counselor. Without any further ado, I will turn it over to Ed.
Okay. Hey, thanks for having me today. So I have to give credit to my wife. She names most of my stuff. She's even named new products that I'd launched. I spent about 25 years doing new product development in the consumer product space, and then spent about 5 years in consulting, and then about 15 years in healthcare. So I started doing this job about 2.5 years ago. I'm what they call an innovation technology counselor. There's about 5 of us across the state. We help mostly tech startups. I have probably about 5% of my clients are existing companies, technology companies, but for the most part, they're startups, usually very early stage. So this is really designed around that. The idea of, where do you start? So my wife said, well, just say where tech startups start. So but I actually also offer a course called Painting the Tech Business Model Canvas. And it's a whole 6-week series. And you actually do customer discovery in the off weeks. We only meet 3 times, but during the off weeks you do. So this is kind of a little bit of taste of some of that. And really around this idea of business model canvas. If you're ever heard of Strategizer or Steve Blank and some of those folks, this has been adopted by, he came out of Stanford University, and a lot of this was adopted by ICOR and National Science Foundation, ICOR. And it's really a great framework. So I'm just going to jump right in real quick about SBDC. I mentioned there's other counselors, but there's also counselors that help all wide range of businesses. We actually serve all the counties, including the city of St. Louis. And we're federally funded by the Small Business Administration. And then I'm actually on the staff of the University of Missouri Extension, and we have other counselors that may be working for a local economic development corporation, other public partnerships. So basically, what we do, the short answer is we help businesses make confident decisions, and that's primarily through one-on-one counseling, but also training like today. We teach everything from QuickBooks to marketing. My 3 focus areas are business model, market research, and small business innovation research grants. I probably spend 45%, maybe 50% of my time on SBIRs, which are a way to get funding to start a high-tech business. But like we mentioned, providing one-on-one counseling. We have other specialized areas like international trade, agribusiness, and also second stage businesses, in addition to what we do in the technology space. So that's enough about SBDC. So the goal today is really introduce you to this concept of business model canvas, and then particularly the value proposition canvas. You'll probably hear me say this at least 10 times. If you don't have the value business canvas, there's no reason to fill out the rest of the business model canvas boxes, because if you don't have product market fit, and we're going to go into that in detail, the rest of it, this dog don't hunt, as we say. And so my bias is very much on understanding the customer. I always think there's 4 simple questions I always ask when I did new product development. What's the problem you're solving? Who's the customer? How do you add value? Another way to say is how is this better than current state? And then how many customers will actually give you money for this? And if you can't answer those 4 questions, then do not pass go, do not collect $200, so to speak. So this is one of my favorite charts. Most of the good stuff I stole or borrowed. And I love this chart because it really zeroes in on the idea that the center of all this is the problem. So what problem really matters? And particularly the word matters, because many times when I did new product development, we generated about 200 seed ideas, and only about 4 or 5 of those would make it to early development, 2 would make it to late development, 1 would launch. So it was about a 200-to-1 ratio. That means 99.5% of the ideas either got shelved or killed. And it's because they really weren't always necessarily solving the top problem that really mattered to people. It may have solved a small problem or a minor problem, but it wasn't enough to kind of have critical mass in order to really make the cash register ring, if you would. And there's three areas that we're going to kind of touch on a little bit today. Well, I shouldn't say that. This is an intro course. So we're really going to touch on really primarily around the customer and the pains and gains and jobs to be done. But when you do my 6-week course, I'm going to cover the top three. The bottom is your issue, right? You're going to figure out, is this technology feasible? But really around this idea of the problem is it desirable to customers? So what are the jobs to be done? What are the pains and gains around those jobs to be done? And I'm going to go into that in more detail. And then what's the revenue model? What's the unit economics? In my longer course, we get into the rest of the model, a business model canvas, boxes that get into cost and revenue streams. Many times you got a great idea, but it may cost you. And I've actually had concepts that I've killed for this reason. So I do the quick math and say, yeah, it's going to cost us about, even if we get it to a large volume, going to cost me $5 to produce, and the consumer wants to pay $3.50. Okay, well, obviously that's a no-brainer, right? But many times a lot of people don't think about that early on. So the idea is to fail fast. You want to kill the ideas quicker than you do, because it's cheaper to kill them when they're at concept stage than actually waiting to go into market. And then related to that is the market viable? Is this something you can actually reach economically? What you don't want to do is go over to U.S. Bank and, back when we used to go and go to the bank anymore, but when you did, you went up to a teller. So could you imagine giving a teller $1 and they give you 90 cents back? Well, that's how some markets act, because you don't have that. It's going to cost you more to reach those customers than the value you're going to get from them. So what is this idea of business model canvas? Well, really, it's the idea of putting a stake in the ground, developing a hypothesis around your concept, who your customer might be, what's their customer value, and then testing that hypothesis with doing customer discovery interviews, which is basically almost a no-cost way for a startup to start to research and understand the customer and their problem. And then you would pivot. So matter of fact, the rule of thumb is we tell people, if you don't pivot 2 or 3 times, you're probably doing it wrong. So it's a constant iteration. And for those who have a kind of a science background, a lot of my startups are scientists, engineers, they understand this idea of hypothesis, that you're creating this hypothesis, you're doing a test, and then you're changing your hypothesis, or you just say, hey, call it a day, and we're going to do that. But there's actually 9 boxes. We're not going to cover all those today, obviously, in an hour and a half. But really, it's the basis for detailed business planning. A lot of people want to write a business plan, but what is the plan? The plan's not really worth anything if you don't really understand the customer and who the problems are. There's kind of 4 major quadrants around customer, value, infrastructure, and financial viability. And but the idea of planning, everything is planning doesn't do anything. It's all untested assumptions. So I can sit here and write out a business plan. It's just a bunch of words until I've really confirmed, do I have something here of value? So leading cause of startups is lack of customers. No business plan survives that first contact with the customer. So the idea here is I think of this as a stake in the ground, that I'm going to put it down, and then I'm going to do research, and I'm constantly adjusting it. And frankly, even though I go to market, things are going to look different. And it's really around that, survive and succeed. So yeah, here's a great chart. I can't remember where this came from. This is a little dated now, but still very much true. Number 1 reasons, building something nobody wants. Particularly in the tech space, a lot of inventors and scientists and engineers and coders, sounds like we got a coder today, are really into the idea of, this is a cool idea. This is really cool, right? They're really into it, but they got to step away and say, but does anybody care? Does anybody care? And what is that technology really doing? What is it solving for them? Because in the end, they don't really care about the technology that much. What they care is you're solving their problem. And one of the challenges is entrepreneurs are very optimistic. Not only are they close to it, a little too close to it, kind of can't see the forest through the trees, but the idea is that, customers select businesses that, like I said, solve the problem. It's not about, you being, hey, I want to show off everybody wants to do a lot of clients I meet with, hey, can I show you my demo? Like, well, I'm going to trust you that you figured out the technology. What I want to know is those 4 questions I said earlier around what's the problem, who's the customer, how many customers give you money, and what's the fancy words value proposition, but I simply say, how are you solving the problem better than current state? And then until you know that, that you can, produce and deliver to the customer, you're not going to be successful in developing that needed plan. This is a great, I don't know if you know this guy, Tom Fishburne. I think I subscribed to his cartoons, a little bit of his cartoons. So these are 3 startups in a room, and they're all, one guy says, "Hey, if I were a teenage girl target, I would love our new product." And then the one guy kind of sheepishly asks, have you actually talked to anyone to make sure? And then of course the other, probably an engineer, says, "What? And leave the room?" Like, oh my gosh, we don't want to go out and talk to people. I'm scared. I don't want to do that. I'd rather just stay here in this nice, comfortable room, and we can just all talk about the idea and kind of hypothesize. But guess what? You got to get out of the building. And this is actually a famous quote from Steve Jobs, in terms of what you just can't ask the customers what they want. You're really trying to understand where they're coming from. They come from observing something, listening to them, experimenting, asking questions. And he says, getting out of the building. And Steve Blank is another one that preaches that, getting out of the building, because you really can't get that from your office. And frankly, you can't even really get that even from, you can kind of glean some of that with some past research, but really, I think you doing the interviews and really understanding where the customer's coming from is huge. Another great quote is from Henry Ford. If you're not familiar with him, he was an early automation guy with Ford. You probably know the Ford Mustang and the Ford trucks, and but back in his day, the horse was the main transportation. So if you asked the customer what they wanted, they would tell you a faster horse. So this is not just about going out and asking customers what they want. It's really asking them, tell me about the job you're doing. What are some of the pains and gains around that? So the simplest way to think about this is this hypothesis is the way the business model canvas works. On the left side is the internal side. So that's kind of like your key partners, activities, resources, and costs. And the right side is your customer side, which is what we're going to spend the most time on today. And what I spend the bulk of the time in my 6-week course on, value proposition. What are those customer segments? And then what are the relationships and the channels that connect those customers to that value? And then what are the revenue streams that kind of tie with that? And those are the biggest components here. So the number one value proposition is really simply a bundle of products and services that create value for them. What's the problem or need for them? What are alternatives are available? And think about alternatives in a very broad sense. A lot of my tech clients will think about, well, no one's got this exact same gizmo. Yeah, they don't have that exact same gizmo, but they may be solving the problem in another way. And so that's what you need to understand. It's not simply saying, hey, I scoured the earth. Nobody has this gizmo, so I'm going to be the only one. Well, yeah, you might be the only one solving the problem that way, but they may be solving the problem other ways. Also, it's difficult to change behavior. So it's some of what you're trying to do is really understand what extra value does that alternative offer. And so what do they like about current state? What do they don't like about current state? And then specifically, how are you going to do that better? Again, that's the simplest way I describe value proposition is how you can do this better than current state. Because current state is very difficult. There's inertia. Human beings do not like to change. There's a few things that kind of broke that mold, but even those took a while for adoption. iPhone probably broke the record on adoption, but there's only a few cases like that. I think the DVD player was also another one that kind of broke some of the standard patterns of how people adopt things. But those are probably two exceptions to the rule. And then the last thing is really around the bundle of products and services that offer that match up with that segment. So each segment may have a different set of values and set of what they want in terms of the products and services. Oh, and by the way, if you got any questions, type it in the chat. We only have one person. It's pretty easy, so I don't even mind if you interrupt me. But generally, I like to go through the material and then plenty of time at Q&A at the end. And then the second one is customer segment. And wish I could spend a lot of time on this. This is really important to really understand the segment. But I'm going to kind of cover it very quickly, and then happy to do any follow-up, or you can also sign up from our longer course. But think about this as who are those individuals in your concept aims to reach and serve through value creation, and think niche first. And when I say individuals, it's even if you're selling to a company, companies don't buy anything. There's an individual at that company that's responsible for that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So this idea of this value proposition versus the customer segment and making sure those match up is what we call product market fit. And it's really what value for whom. And this is like whom, not who. But if you don't have this, like I said, do not go past go, do not collect $200. If you don't have this fit, the rest of the boxes are a moot point. So some of my clients want to fill out all these boxes thinking, hey, okay, if I fill out all this, I'm done. No, figure out the product market fit. If you don't have product market fit, you got to pivot or just stop and work on another concept or go back and get another full-time job. Or don't quit your current full-time job. Because without that product market fit, the other boxes are a moot point. And frankly, understanding who that segment is and the value you're offering that will drive the rest of those boxes in terms of what your resources are, key partnerships, channels, how you build those relationships. So this is another thing I got from I-Corps. I was involved, I speak at NSF I-Corps. We actually do one out of the University of Missouri, Rolla, but the gal that ran the program retired, and so they're kind of in the middle of, so they're not having a fall one, but that's another customer discovery that is even more intense. And then they have a national I-Corps, but it really follows that same idea of trying to understand who that customer is and where does your technology fit. So the first, I love this process that they've developed, which is, think about your core technology. And what really is the core idea there, and then where might that apply? So what problems can it solve? And think of that in terms of could be broad industries, and then when you get into segments, which now starting to think of what industries have those problems. And I'll show you an example of this because I think the example helps understand a little bit better. And then within those industries, what are types of customers that most likely would be interested in this? And then you can even go further, and there's a specific subset that has the most need, right? So there might be people that like, yeah, it's kind of nice. And then I got people that are like, hey, I'm ready to buy this as soon as it's available. And then back when I said earlier, even if you're going to a business doesn't buy anything, it's an individual. And generally you always have a user, decider, and payer. And in the example, I'll show you what you mean. They may be the same person, but not likely. Usually a lot of times, and especially in healthcare, in the ag business, it's a very multi-layered thing. So you've got a patient that is probably the user, and decider might be healthcare system or a physician, and then the payer may be actually Medicare. So you've got to be able to kind of understand each of those segments, and they're somewhat all your customers. Even though you may not actually talk to directly the patient, you still need to understand how they use the product. So here's a great example. This is actually a startup that invented a portable ultrasound machine using machine learning and AI. And they figured out that their broad problems they were solving were around this idea of accuracy and diagnosing. And they figured out, after a lot of research, they figured out there were two major industries that they were considering. One was defense, like the military, and then the other one was healthcare. And then even within those subsegments, they looked at further down. And so they selected healthcare. Within healthcare, the two subsegments they were considering were medium, they got that specific, medium-sized urban trauma hospitals, okay? Not just any hospital, but these have to be a hospital that's got a certain level of trauma verification. And then the other one was first responders. If you're not familiar with that term, those are, think of someone, if you call 911, the ambulance driver that comes to you, EMT, emergency medical services is what EMS, you'll hear that term, was the other one. So after doing lots of customer discovery, they figured out that it was really around medium urban trauma hospitals. So then they even segmented further and figured out, okay, well, there were two different subsegments that were most likely interested in this. One was the ER and one was the maternity ward. Well, after doing lots of research, they figured out the ER was actually the better option. And then they figured out that the user was actually the ER resident who was extremely excited about this concept, but guess what? They don't make the buying decision. So the decider is actually the ER director who actually had to build it into their budget. And then they figured out the purchasing manager was actually the one that actually had to physically pay for it and process their invoice. So you can actually start it from the bottom and work your way up. I like to start broad and go narrow, but the way this template works is you can go back and forth. But it's really important to understand who that segment is. So I'm going to jump into a little bit more specifically market research. The way to think about market research, there's primary research, which is more kind of broad market. And then you have secondary market research, which is more, or excuse me, primary research is more specific to the customer. I had that backwards, sorry. And then secondary market research, I should have left that slide in there. I'm trying to reduce the slides for the short one. The secondary is really more broader about the market. So what I recommend to people is start broader and start with secondary market research, and then define who's that best segment that you want to go talk to, and then do primary research with those and doing customer discovery interviews. And I'll talk a little bit more what that looks like. Generally, I always recommend if you can start with industry experts, especially if it's a really technical thing, and then work your way through and try to get to potential users, deciders, or purchasers. But this is not easy. This takes lots of networking, but it's important that you do this, and I'll talk a little bit later, do this in person or in Zoom. This isn't like send out a quick survey. A lot of people want to try to shortcut this, but it's really having that conversation. And I'll send you some resources on how to do that, but it's really having that intimate conversation and them talk about their problems. So some great secondary market research. Eleanor can help you with some of this in the library. Google or Google Scholar is another option. Business trade journals, government data. There are some paid market studies out there. Some are great, some are not so great. And then we also have a service through our research arm called SBDC Net, taxpayer funded, like most of our services. Takes about 4 weeks, but it's a research analyst down in University of Texas in San Antonio that will do deep library searches to figure out where might this data exist, that give you this broad understanding, kind of lay of the land kind of thing, so you just to work your way into understanding this broader market and then figure out what segments you want to go after. So then what we recommend is something magical happens around 60 or 70 interviews. You start to really see themes and make those creative connections across what you're hearing. So we recommend you do about 70 to 100 interviews. If you do National I-Corps with NSF, they have you do actually 125 interviews. I actually recommend you do this per segment. So if you're trying to figure out your different segments, you may need to do those interviews. Some of them you may kind of stop after 20 interviews, realize this isn't working. This is the right segment. I got to move on to another segment. So that may not be actually per segment. Again, start with industry experts. But here, the key thing is these are people that do not know you. Because if you talk to your family and friends, they're going to lie. They're going to say, they're going to be nice. And frankly, in the United States, our culture is we don't want to, hey, this startup, we don't want to bust their dream. And so a lot of times, so that's why you don't want to talk about your potential solution. You're just simply saying, hey, I want to get your advice. I want to learn what you're doing as it relates to this particular problem. And then getting them to talk about focus on learning, jobs to be done, pains and gains. And like I said, do not share your potential solution. And again, do this in person or in Zoom. You really want to get that nonverbal. I forget, the studies have shown about 60% of all communications nonverbal. So it's really hard to do that when you can maybe do a little bit over the phone if you had to, but I think in person or Zoom works best. So this idea of product market fit is really understanding what's that customer's profile around those jobs to be done, pains and gains, and then matching it up with your value map. And I want to talk about that a little bit. And then that match is really where we're going to understand this idea of product market fit. And it really all starts with customer discovery. So can you build and deliver a product that satisfies their problem or their need? I mean, it seems so basic, but you'd be surprised how many people don't think about that because they're falling in love with the technology. They want to just go to market. Like, hey, I got this widget. I'm just going to figure out how to go to market. And they spend all their time and effort thinking about how to actually market it when they don't even know who they're. That's almost like you going on a trip and not getting out your Google Maps, or in the old days, we actually got out a folded map, and you just got in your car and just started driving, right? That's essentially what you're doing when you go to market that way. So do the features deliver value? Do they alleviate that pain, create the gain? So the way we think about this map, this broader value, and this is really now, if you haven't figured out, I'm getting into the value proposition canvas, is this idea of, do my internal side, my features and benefits match the external of needs and jobs? Again, who's the customer? Why do they buy? So let's talk a little bit about the customer profile. So we've got this idea of jobs. I like to call it jobs to be done, because many times they can't complete the job. That's why there's a problem, or there's a pain, or they do complete it, but there's a pain around it. Maybe it's not fully completed, and there's generally a gain when they do complete it, or they complete it well. Some more specifics: jobs are things that the customer has to do or tries to get done in some either work or just general life. They're generally tasks, and there's multiple tasks within this. If you actually really step back and look at the detail of this, I've got an example here of a taxi app, and it's actually research that Uber actually did before they invented the Uber app, and it's the idea that even back, especially before the app, calling a taxi, you had a lot of jobs to be done in terms of figuring out who the taxi is, where do I find them, everything. And this idea of trying to perform and complete those is really trying to solve something, what needs they're trying to satisfy. So the pains are really around what annoys them before, during, or after completing the job, or maybe prevents them getting the job done. So even risk of bad outcomes of getting the job badly is also a pain. So if, like in the B2B world, that actually might be, the buyer doesn't get promoted because they bought the wrong widget, so there's some indirect and some emotional benefits or emotional pain that happens if the job isn't done well. And then gains are really outcomes and benefits your customers want. Now keep in mind, there's some basic benefits. I actually spent some time in the food business, and guess what? If food doesn't taste good, all bets off, right? So the minimum and required benefit in food. So generally new product concepts where, hey, this product tastes good and something else, and it's convenient, or and it is less calories, or and something, right? So there's always kind of this minimum that we think about table stakes. So think about this gain as going beyond that, and really going beyond even what they expect ideally. The gains could be functional utility, but it also could be things around social gain, positive emotions, could be cost savings. Generally, the higher the emotion you can get on a gain, the more likely you're going to get someone to buy your product, because they typically buy more on emotion than logic. Our brains just work that way. So let's talk about this taxi app. So this is a great example of, and again, we would do kind of a breakout session in my 6-week course. We drill into this a great deal, but for the short time, I'm just going to kind of dive right in and kind of give you the answer, if you would. So the jobs really are calling the taxi, find the taxi, give them directions, and then paying them. And what's interesting, the first Uber app didn't even have you paying, I believe. That was not their first minimal viable product. But they quickly knew that they had to do that. That came out of the research, and that was a quick second 2.0, if you would. And then some of the gains were, arrive on time, fair price. I want a professional driver, easy payment system. I remember one of my first interviews up in the Sears Tower, and luckily they paid us our expenses before we left in cash. And luckily I had enough money to buy my cab. Otherwise I was stuck in Chicago, and, always had to think ahead and like, okay, do I have enough money? Well, how much is the cab going to cost me? And that was a big deal back before, Uber and Lyft. Waiting a long time. Some of the pains were waiting a long time. Am I going to overcharge? Is the taxi going to give me, the long way to get there and overcharge me because I'm not familiar with that? If I'm traveling, I'm not familiar with that city. Compete with other customers, and then unsafe driver. Been in some cabs where the wheels wobbling pretty fast at a high speed, so it get a little scary. So this was actually based on real research that Uber did, and so the idea here is you want to really start here. and think in terms of that value proposition and that customer segment. And then you're creating this hypothesis around what those look like. And then you're going out and, testing that hypothesis through interviews. So it's this idea of understanding their problems, needs, and wants. And again, is my hypothesis right? And if it's right, then you will have product market fit. What value for whom? So this is kind of an iterative process. You're trading this, you're hypothesizing, you're experimenting through asking questions, observing, you're learning through listening, watching, analyzing data, and then you're iterating. So you're gonna, like I said, if you don't pivot at least 2 or 3 times, you're doing something wrong. I've had people that said, yeah, I went out and talked to people and they all say they love it. Well, what they did is they exposed them to their concept. And when you give in research, it's what we call stimulus. So if I give you a stimulus, then you have to respond, right? So you're responding just to that stimulus, but you're not really giving me this broad understanding of what your problem is. And so you're really getting that. If you really get truly that true understanding, then you're going to say, well, I'm close to the problem. Generally, what we find is you have a nugget, and the nugget is you're close to the problem. You may be kind of like, you're almost like hitting the side of the problem, but it doesn't hit the problem square on, is generally what we find when we do research. And then you hypothesize again. So you kind of start all over again. And a lot of people go, well, that's a lot of work. And I'm like, yeah, it is. So doing customer discovery, generally, I tell people this may take you a year to do this. So I've seen some people do it in about 6 months, but it can take quite a bit of work. But it's cheaper to do that than to go to market and then you fail, or go to market and then you're trying to figure this out as you're in market. Not a good idea. So we won't play the video today, but I'll send you this link. But he does a great job on this video where he kind of describes, how this should work and understanding and what are some of the questions in the flow of that. And then I also have a bunch of other videos from VentureWell, which are also Steve Blank videos. But it goes back to this value proposition versus customer segment. So let's talk about the value map for a second. So remember we had the customer profile side. Now we're thinking about on the left side, we have the value map of think about those as gain creators, pain relievers. And that's going to become from the product or services that you're offering, or really technically it's goods and services. They're all products. But we'll go with what they have here. And think about what are those key features, because you want to make sure that you're solving kind of that top 2 or 3 problems. You may create this great feature and find out that it's solving problem number 10 on the list. Well, guess what? That's a great add-on to maybe an existing product, but that's not innovative enough to break into the marketplace. So it's good to understand that. So the value proposition on the left side, and I kind of already covered this a little briefly, but in more detail, describing your product and what it does and how it does it. Now, you're not describing that to the customer. You're writing this down yourself. And then what you're trying to do is when you do the interviews, then you say, does that seem to start to match up? It must relate to how the product will allow that customer to complete the job. So as you understand their jobs, then you're going to go, oh, okay, well, I thought this was the top feature, but it turns out actually that's like 8th on the list. Number 1 is, they want convenience or whatever you're figuring out. And then the pain relievers, which is on the bottom one. I don't know why they have it. It feels like logic should show me the next one, but I'll go with what they have here. Describes what and how you eliminate or reduce specific pains or reduce or eliminate annoyances. So it might be like how I'm going to, maybe it's reduce cost as an example. On the gain creators, how do your product address the gains during that customer discovery? So again, some of these are going to be required and expected, but you want to go after desired or unexpected gains. So the value map is created based on those gains and pains articulated in that customer profile based on what you learn in the customer discovery interviews. So again, if you can't figure this out, it's because you haven't done enough interviews. So here's a value map that the research that Uber did based on their gains articulated in the customer profile. So the value map for them that matched up, here we go. And if you notice, not all of these they did initially. But this idea of, it's a smartphone app. So the big thing they learned was instant booking, right? So I know when the cab, I can visually see where the cab, or not in this case, it's an Uber, not a cab, where the Uber driver is, and I literally get the little map. I love that. I'm an anal retentive guy, and I love the fact that I can watch the little car move, and I know, okay, now he's 10 minutes away. Now he's 9 minutes away. You can literally sit there and stare at the app if you want to watch them as they truck along. You have an assigned driver. You know who the person is. You have a rating system, so you have a pretty good idea. You're not competing with other customers. If you ever watch Trains, Planes, and Automobiles, I personally try to get a cab in Manhattan at 4:30 on a Friday. It's nearly impossible because supply and demand don't match up. The demand for cabs exceeds the number of cabs, and you're literally competing with customers. I don't have cash. I don't have to worry about cash because I built in my credit card into the Uber app. Again, wasn't something they initially did, but once they figured out the mechanics of doing that banking transactions with credit cards, they added that at 2.0. So the other thing was around this idea of saving time, because I could predict when the cab was going to be there. It also gave me an estimated time of when I was going to arrive at my destination. So that was all pre-planned. I knew that ahead of time. Where the old days, you got into the cab and you're like, yeah, I think O'Hare Airport's only about 30 minutes away, but you don't really know, and you don't know where you're at, right? You don't know, are we halfway? Now we got stuck in traffic. Where are we? So they eliminated a lot of those problems. Professional drivers, and then because I talked about the rating system earlier and that visual map. Let's see. So again, I can't emphasize this enough. Got to have product market fit. And so the idea is working on this canvas is you're really trying to put that together in terms of, those are the two pieces, and it's the foundation of that business model canvas. Probably said that 3 times at least already, but you don't even know enough about the customer to even start to fill out the rest of these other boxes. So here's a great ad-lib value proposition, very similar to what we did back in consumer products, where we really try to hone in on what we call brand positioning. This is kind of a kissing cousin to that, and it really goes around the value proposition. So it's simply a short ad-lib, our blank, our products and services help these kind of customers who want to have this job by doing this, either reducing, avoiding, and then avoiding this pain. So, reducing costs, ideally, increasing this, enabling them to sell more product or be on time with their delivery or whatever, right? And then the other important add-on that I think I've added, not everybody puts this on there, is unlike, and now you got to think about your competitive, value proposition, because a value proposition is no good unless you have it relative to the competitive marketplace. And again, that may be current state, and so your biggest competitor might be just do nothing, status quo, just currently do what I'm currently doing. And so that's where you've got to really hone in and say, yeah, but the current state doesn't reduce the cost enough, or whatever. So that's unlike whatever that is. So the summary here, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A. So hopefully I don't go too fast through this. So the first step is developing that working business concept is, but doing the business model canvas is like doing the value proposition canvas. It's an iterative process. Customer discovery is the key, determining what those jobs are, and then your preference in getting those done. And if you've got a good product fit. If you don't have the product market fit, again, I say just this dog don't hunt is what we used to say. And customer discovery is critical to that. So I won't go through this, but I'll send you this. These are the key questions that you have to ask yourself on each of these boxes. Generally, what I recommend is after you kind of figure out your product market fit, you're now thinking about channels and how would you reach them efficiently, and then thinking about their relationships, and then how's that all tie into, how you're actually going to make revenue, in terms of how you reach them. And then the left side is really almost more your, what are your key activities, partnerships, resources, and then kind of cost structure. Remember I said that's kind of more your internal gain. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen And we will do any questions from this large audience that we have. Just joking. Selena, you got the floor. I know you got some burning questions. Or did I put you?
I don't see any questions. Selena's not coming off mute, then maybe she doesn't, or maybe all of that great information is going to take some time to spin around in her brain, and that happens with me sometimes. The questions come later.
And
So
Selena, if you're since you're the only one here, happy to. I'm curious. What are you working on, and how might you tackle this with the concept you're working on?
well,
Is she even still there? Did we?
possibly not. Well, if she still is, I've posted the next upcoming events in the chat. Next week, we've got a Work for Yourself at 50+. Next month, we're covering cybersecurity, and in December, we'll be back talking about QuickBooks basics again. So the links to register are there. And thank you so much, Ed, for this fantastic program. I'm going to stop the recording.
All right. Hey, can you send me a link to